My son died for 11 minutes, and when he came back, he wasn't my little boy anymore. My name is Grace Weaver, and I'm writing this because I believe someone out there needs to hear it. On January 9th, 2024, my 12-year-old son, Elijah Weaver, drowned in a frozen lake during a winter hike. Doctors declared him clinically dead, but he returned with a horrifying message from Jesus that shook our entire family to the core. Elijah didn't just see heaven. He was shown something darker, a side of eternity most people refuse to believe exists. What he shared when he opened his eyes changed how I see prayer, faith, and parenting forever. It was a Tuesday, cold, bright, and beautiful. Elijah had a snow day, and my husband thought it'd be fun to take him hiking near the old Miller Trail. It's not far from our house, nothing dangerous, just frozen woods and old paths. I stayed home to work, thinking they'd be back by lunch. That day started like every other day. By dinner, everything in my life had changed. I got the call at 2:12 p.m. It wasn't even from my husband. It was from a stranger, a man who had found them. His voice was shaking, and I could hear sirens in the background. "Are you Elijah's mother? You need to get to St. Joseph's emergency. He fell through the lake. He's not breathing." My knees buckled. I remember grabbing the keys and running barefoot to the car. I don't even remember locking the door. I don't even know how I made it there. Time didn't feel real. When I walked into that hospital, I saw my husband sitting on the floor in the ER hallway. His face was gray. His hands were bloody. Elijah was already in the trauma room, surrounded by at least 6 people trying to restart his heart. I caught a glimpse of his tiny blue lips. I screamed so loud I felt something tear inside me. They tried everything. They did compressions for 11 minutes straight. I could hear someone say, "Time of death, 2:44 p.m." But then, something happened. Right when the nurse went to cover him with the sheet, Elijah gasped. Not just a breath. A loud, choking gasp like he was being dragged back from somewhere far, far away. His whole body jolted. The room erupted in confusion. One of the techs dropped the oxygen mask. Nurses cried. A young doctor whispered, "This is not possible." But that was just the beginning. Elijah wasn't normal after that. The look in his eyes. He didn't blink like a child anymore. He stared, as if he was still halfway somewhere else. And the first words he whispered when he could finally speak were, "Mom, Jesus is real, but he's not smiling." We weren't thrill seekers. We weren't careless. It was supposed to be a short walk in the snow. My husband, Daniel, had walked that same trail dozens of times growing up. He just wanted Elijah to breathe some fresh air, toss snowballs, maybe eat peanut butter sandwiches by the bench near the lake. But no one saw the patch of weak ice. It was covered by a layer of soft snow, just thick enough to hide the cracks. Daniel had warned Elijah not to go too close, but boys are boys. Elijah saw a rabbit print near the edge and walked over. One step too many, and the ice gave way with a loud, splitting crack. Daniel told me later that everything slowed down. Elijah went under instantly. The water was so cold he couldn't even scream. It was like the lake swallowed him whole. Daniel jumped in after him, but the water was like knives. His legs locked up. The cold robbed him of coordination, of breath. He couldn't find Elijah. He screamed his name again and again, diving over and over, until another hiker saw what was happening and called 911. The rescue team arrived 12 minutes later. By the time they pulled Elijah out, he wasn't breathing. His skin was gray. His pupils were fixed. One EMT said quietly, "I don't think he's coming back." But still, they tried. They tried because Daniel screamed like a man possessed. He wouldn't stop begging them. "Please, God, please, not my son." He collapsed in the snow and had to be pulled away. He was sobbing, shaking, screaming Elijah's name into the wind. And then, when they were loading him into the ambulance, Elijah's fingers twitched. At first they thought it was just a reflex, but then his chest moved, and that was the beginning of a miracle. Or maybe the beginning of something else entirely. Before they left for the hike, Elijah said something strange. He had been tying his boots in the hallway, and I was packing snacks. He looked up and said, "Mom, do you think Jesus would be mad if people stopped listening to him?" I paused. "No, honey. Jesus understands. He forgives." He nodded, but then said, "I think he's running out of patience." I laughed. I thought it was something he heard in Sunday school or maybe online. He'd always been sensitive, always asking big questions, but I didn't think anything of it. Those were the last words he said to me before he died. It haunts me now. When he finally came back and was conscious enough to speak, he grabbed my wrist with a strength that didn't match his small body. His voice was raspy, but his eyes were wide and fierce. "He's real, Mom. He's so real. And he's not what they say. He's not soft. He's not blind." I asked him what he meant. Elijah whispered, "Jesus said, many people pray, but they don't mean it. They sing, but they don't listen. They call him Lord, but ignore his voice." I didn't know what to say. He started crying, not out of fear, but because, as he said, they don't know. They think they have time. That night, I watched him sleep beside me, and he kept whispering in his dreams. I couldn't understand most of it, but one word came again and again: fire. When the hospital told me he had no pulse for 11 minutes, my first thought was, how can he be alive? My second thought, what did he see? Because the moment Elijah opened his eyes, it wasn't relief I felt. It was a strange kind of stillness, like he had aged 10 years in those lost minutes. He stared past us, not at us. He wasn't confused. He wasn't panicked. He looked like he had seen too much. That night, the doctors checked his brain function. There was no damage, no memory loss, nothing wrong. But Elijah kept saying one thing: time is short. We brought in a counselor. She gently asked him, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He said, "I mean, Jesus is closing the doors, like the ark, and people are still laughing, still sleeping." She thought he had a vivid imagination. She chalked it up to trauma. But I know my son, and he didn't smile once that week. He refused to play video games, refused to watch cartoons. He only asked for a Bible, and every night I found him praying alone in the dark. Not childlike bedtime prayers, but intense, whispering, gripping the sheets prayers. He'd say things like, "Help them wake up. Help them see." Elijah wasn't the same. He still hasn't laughed the same way since. And I know now, he brought something back with him. Not a story, a warning. Daniel told me he'll never forget the exact moment Elijah's body went limp. He had pulled him out of the icy water, screaming for help, slapping his face, begging him to breathe. But Elijah's eyes were open and lifeless. That's what he keeps saying. His eyes were open, Grace, but he wasn't in there anymore. The paramedics tried everything. They pumped his chest, they gave him oxygen, they inserted tubes, injected epinephrine, performed defibrillation, but nothing, no pulse, no breath. At 2:44 p.m., one of the EMTs stepped back, defeated. I'm told she softly said, "I'm sorry." That's when Daniel collapsed to the snow, sobbing into Elijah's boots, crying out to God in the kind of prayer that only comes when you've been stripped bare of everything. Not polished, not rehearsed, just desperate. And that's when Elijah's spirit was already gone. What no one on earth knew at that moment, what no one could see, was that Elijah had already left his body. He later told us in a trembling voice that the second his heart stopped, he felt light, like gravity no longer applied to him. He floated above the scene, watching the people fight for his life like distant actors on a stage. But then, suddenly, he felt a pull, strong and cold, like being caught in a current beneath the ocean. And then he said, "I fell into silence." But it wasn't peaceful, it was hollow, and the air around him began to vanish. Elijah described the transition as stepping into a hallway made of nothing. No floor, no ceiling, no end. Just awareness. He said he couldn't see his body, but he still existed. It was like being turned inside out, feeling everything, sensing everything, but with no eyes, no skin, no breath. Then he noticed something ahead, a distant shimmer, like fire through fog. But it wasn't warm, it was terrifying. He said as he moved closer, he felt every lie he ever told, every time he had been mean, every moment he had ignored his conscience. It all came alive around him, like echoes bouncing off invisible walls. "It felt like I was being measured," he whispered, "not punished, but nothing could be hidden." He said a presence appeared at the end of that path, but it wasn't Jesus, not yet. It was an angel, but not like the ones in children's books. Elijah described it as a massive being made of light and flame, with wings that didn't flap but shimmered like electric currents. It didn't speak with a voice, but directly into his mind. "You do not belong here yet," it said, "but you must go farther. You must see what they do not believe." And then the ground beneath him cracked open, and Elijah fell, but not down, through. Elijah described the place he landed in as a desert with no sand, no sun, no wind, no time. It was dry, and the air tasted like metal and ash. He wasn't walking, he was simply there, hovering in this barren place where no one spoke, yet he could sense millions of souls around him, not in bodies, just consciousnesses. Some cried, others screamed, most were just silent. He said the silence was worse than the screams. They were souls who thought they were good enough, he told me later, but they never really knew him. He described faces appearing and disappearing, men, women, teens, all frozen in regret. One woman reached out to him, her face twisted in agony. But before she could speak, a wind of fire passed through and blew her image away like smoke. I begged him to stop telling me, but he insisted. He said, "Mom, it wasn't hell, but it was near it. It was a waiting place for people who thought they didn't need to listen while they had time." And then, Jesus came. He didn't walk in. He didn't appear with fanfare. Elijah said that the entire realm shifted before Jesus entered. The silence tore, like a sheet being ripped in two. The light cracked open the dark. And then, from behind a veil of thunder and golden light, a voice spoke. It wasn't angry. It wasn't soft. It was like every truth you've ever known being spoken at once. "Come forward," it said, "for you must see why I weep." Elijah described Jesus as a light that breathed. He had form, but it wasn't made of flesh. It was made of fire wrapped in peace. And when Jesus turned to look at him, Elijah cried uncontrollably. "I couldn't look in his eyes, Mom," he told me. They held every broken prayer, every moment someone gave up on hope, and still, he loved them. Jesus reached toward him, not with a hand, but with presence, and showed him the church. Not a building, not a Sunday service, but hearts. And what Elijah saw broke him. He saw churches full of singing people with hollow hearts. He saw prayers being spoken with no faith. He saw children like him choosing darkness, thinking there'd be time to change later. And then Jesus said something that froze Elijah's soul. "Tell them, I am not what they think. I am holy. I am returning, and they are not ready." And just like that, Elijah was pulled back through the fire, back through the silence, back through the water, and into his body. Elijah said something that still keeps me awake at night. He told me, "Mom, Jesus didn't smile at me." That shook me to my core. I always imagined Jesus with open arms, gentle eyes, the Prince of Peace. But Elijah said when he first saw him, Jesus looked heartbroken, not angry, but grieving. Elijah tried to describe him, but kept stumbling for words. He said Jesus wasn't glowing white like in the paintings. He was made of fire and gold, shifting like sunlight on rippling water. His robe wasn't fabric, but a layer of living purity that responded to every thought. His eyes held eternity. Elijah said, "When he looked at me, it was like every part of me was visible, even things I didn't know about myself. I saw the truth about me, and it burned, but in a way that healed." Jesus didn't speak at first. He just watched Elijah, and Elijah felt everything: the pain of people ignoring him, the betrayal of believers who used his name but never knew him, the grief of every prayer said without love. Then Jesus spoke, not with his mouth, but with his being. "You are here because they won't listen unless it comes from a child." Elijah said he fell on his knees weeping. He said, "Jesus, I don't want to go back." But Jesus responded, "You must. You have seen what many refuse to believe. Now, speak." That's when the visions began. Elijah said Jesus stretched out his hand, not to touch, but to reveal. And in a moment, the spiritual realm unfolded like layers of transparent fabric, worlds behind worlds, all connected to our earthly life. And then came the message, not spoken like a preacher's sermon, not delivered with softness. It was a warning. Jesus said, "Tell them I am returning, but not as they expect. Tell them many who believe they are safe are not. Tell them the gates are narrow and the time is short." Elijah said he was shown thousands of people in churches, holding Bibles, singing songs, but they weren't walking through the narrow gate. He said it looked like they were standing in line, thinking they were entering heaven, but at the last second, the path curved, and they were confused. He heard people shouting, "Lord, didn't we serve you?" But Jesus said, "You served a version of me you created in your mind. You never let me know you." Elijah was trembling as he told me this. He said, "They're not ready, Mom. They think belief is enough." But Jesus said knowing him, really knowing him, is the only way. He paused and whispered, "He weeps for them." Elijah begged me not to tell this part, but he later said Jesus told him, "You must not hide the truth." So here it is. Jesus showed Elijah a glimpse of the fate of souls who die without ever knowing him. He didn't call it hell, but Elijah said it was a place without God. The light there was gray, not dark, not bright, just absence. Absence of love, absence of joy, absence of hope. Elijah said he could feel the weight of regret pressing on the souls trapped there. He said, "They all knew." That was the worst part. They knew they had the chance. They remembered the moments they ignored, when they pushed God away, and they couldn't undo it. He saw one man screaming silently, eyes wide, trapped in a space where time didn't move. He saw a teenage girl crying out for her mother, but no sound came, only pain. And Jesus whispered to Elijah, "This is why you must speak. They must not come here." Elijah told me that no soul in that realm hated God. They hated themselves, because the truth hit them too late. I cried listening to this. What mother wants to hear that their son saw such pain? But Elijah grabbed my hand and said, "If they don't hear it now, they'll feel it later. And I don't want anyone to feel that." Of all the things Elijah saw, this one pierced my heart the most. He said Jesus showed him something called the sleeping church. It wasn't a building, it was a vision of believers whose lights had gone out. He said, they still go to services. They sing and post Bible verses, but they've stopped listening. They've turned their faith into a schedule. He described seeing people on their phones during worship. He saw pastors who cared more about applause than obedience. He saw Christians arguing about doctrine while the lost walked away unnoticed. And Jesus said, "They speak my name, but their hearts are far from me." Elijah said Jesus looked away when he showed him this, not in anger, but in sorrow. He showed him how distraction had replaced devotion. How many Christians no longer even heard his voice. Elijah was crying when he told me this. He said, "Mom, Jesus told me he knocks on their hearts every day, but they keep saying, 'I'm busy right now, Lord.'" He paused and added, "He's not going to keep knocking forever." That sentence stayed with me. Because Elijah was just 12. He didn't know how to invent that kind of grief. It was too real, too raw, too divine. And I believe him, because since that day, he hasn't been the same. Elijah didn't say this lightly. He said it with tears streaming down his face, the kind of sorrow you only feel when you've seen something eternal, something final. He told me, "Mom, the gates of heaven aren't wide open anymore. They're slowly closing." When I asked him what he meant, he explained that Jesus showed him a vision of the heavenly gates, not made of gold, but of light and justice. And these gates weren't standing open like the stories we hear. They were narrowing. He said, "So many people think they'll just walk right in. They don't understand that heaven is not for the proud. It's for the surrendered." Elijah saw crowds of people approaching the gates. Some were dressed in church clothes, holding Bibles, quoting scriptures. But the gates didn't open, not because they weren't good people, but because their hearts had never truly repented. They had memorized the words, but never lived the truth. He said Jesus stood at the gate, not turning people away, but weeping for them, because they were never told what it meant to really know him. Heaven, Elijah told me, isn't for people who believe in Jesus as an idea. It's for people who let Jesus transform them. And the gate is closing because the time is nearly up. Jesus showed him that we are in the final stretch of grace, and the enemy knows it. That's why he's flooding people with distraction, pride, spiritual laziness, even inside the church. They think they're saved, Elijah said quietly, but they've never passed through the fire of surrender. And that fire is the key to the door. This part is the reason I decided to share Elijah's story publicly. Because the message wasn't just for individuals, it was for the world. Jesus showed Elijah what's coming, and it terrified him. He saw a calendar made of clouds, turning pages rapidly. Certain dates burned brighter than others. And then he saw the earth from above, not like from space, but through a spiritual lens. He saw nations rising and falling, natural disasters, confusion in the skies, and a trembling beneath the oceans. But the worst part wasn't the physical destruction, it was the spiritual blindness. He said, people were partying while the sky cracked. They were filming disasters but not praying. They were arguing about truth instead of seeking it. Elijah described a world addicted to noise, constant scrolling, endless debates, fake peace. And while the earth shook, people refused to look up. Jesus whispered to him, "They will cry out only when it's too late. Tell them not to wait." He was shown churches becoming entertainment centers, children growing up never hearing about the power of repentance, families replacing worship with performance, and a society where light was called darkness, and darkness was celebrated. But Elijah said there was a remnant, a small group scattered across the earth who still listened, who still lived holy, who still prayed in secret and obeyed without applause. And Jesus called them the Watchers. He said, "These are the ones holding back the tide." But they are growing tired. They need help. Elijah said Jesus is sending out one last call, and it will come through unexpected people, children, the quiet ones, the broken ones, because the world is out of time and heaven is out of patience. Elijah said that just before he returned to his body, Jesus showed him a vision that froze his soul. He called it the rising black. It was not just about war or famine or earthquakes. Those were just symptoms. What Elijah saw was a spiritual darkness covering the earth like smoke, creeping into schools, churches, government buildings, homes, even into the hearts of believers. He saw children turning cold, families divided, churches silenced by fear of offense. He saw demonic spirits moving freely, unchallenged, because people no longer believed in warfare. They thought everything was mental, emotional, not spiritual. And the darkness wasn't chaotic. It was strategic. It whispered lies with soft voices. It told people to just live their truth. It replaced conviction with comfort. And people welcomed it with open arms. He saw one man in a suit, powerful, global, standing at a podium. Behind him was a false light, beautiful but deceptive. He promised peace, unity, and healing, but Elijah said his words carried poison. People cheered, they clapped, they bowed. and behind him stood a shadow, watching. Jesus told Elijah, "That which is coming will not look evil. It will look like love, but it will be a lie, and many will fall for it." Elijah begged Jesus, "What can we do?" Jesus replied, "Only those who walk in my spirit will see it for what it is. Only those who know my voice will survive what's coming." Elijah told me, "Mom, there's no time left to play church." He saw cities going dark, one by one, while houses of light remained untouched. These were homes of true believers where prayer was alive and God's name was spoken with reverence. And then Jesus said, "Prepare, not in fear, but in fire, because the darkness is coming fast, and the only thing that can stand against it is a soul already burning with light." When Elijah came back, when his eyes opened again in that cold hospital bed, he was breathing, yes. But I knew instantly he didn't come back the same, not in a cliché way, not in a "he's more mature" kind of way. Something had been cut away and something else poured in. He looked around the room like he didn't recognize it at first. He blinked slowly, as if he had to adjust to the heaviness of a body again, and when he saw me, he didn't smile. His face was solemn, still reverent. He just whispered, "You were praying. I heard you." I broke into tears. The doctors were baffled. They ran brain scans, neurological tests, everything. Zero damage. They called it a miracle recovery. But Elijah didn't act like a boy who dodged a tragedy. He acted like a boy who'd seen a war. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay still in the hospital bed, eyes open, whispering softly under his breath. I leaned in and heard it. "Forgive them, Lord. They don't know what's coming." The days that followed were strange. Elijah refused to watch TV. He wouldn't even listen to music. He said the noise distracted the spirit. He wouldn't eat meat, not because of health, but because he said, "God is calling me to be clean for the message." But the part that stunned me the most? He started seeing things. At church the next week, he whispered to me, "That man has a hurting heart. He's smiling, but he's angry inside." Later, we found out that man had just lost his brother in a drunk driving accident. At home, he would sit silently for hours, then suddenly say things like, "Something's coming to the west. We need to pray." One day he touched my shoulder and said, "You don't have to worry about the lump anymore." I froze. I hadn't told anyone I was waiting on test results for a lump in my breast. 2 days later, the doctor called. Benign, no explanation, just gone. Elijah doesn't claim to be a prophet. He doesn't ask for attention. But he told me, "Jesus gave me his fire, not to impress people, but to prepare them." And that fire left scars no MR I could see. Before January 9th, 2024, Elijah was your typical 12-year-old. He liked Minecraft, pizza, Nerf battles. He laughed at fart jokes and collected shiny rocks like they were diamonds. His world was lighthearted, innocent. That Elijah didn't come back. The Elijah who returned was quieter, still, watching. He didn't laugh the same. His jokes faded. His eyes, deep brown with gold flecks, seemed to look through people, not just at them. It broke my heart at first. I grieved the child I had raised. I missed the silliness, the spontaneous dance moves in the kitchen, the way he used to say, "Mom, you're the best cook in the galaxy," even when I burned the pancakes. But then something else grew in its place. A young man of God. Elijah started waking up at 4:30 a.m. to pray. Not because anyone told him to, but because, as he said, "That's when I can hear him clearest." He began to write in a journal every night, pages and pages of what he called downloads. I wasn't allowed to read them at first, but one day he said Jesus told him it's time to share the words. I opened it and wept. There were warnings, visions, names of people he hadn't met, descriptions of things happening in other countries that were later confirmed on the news. He wrote of angelic beings standing watch over cities, of spiritual seals being broken, of a great shaking to come that would separate the truly surrendered from the pretending. One page simply said, "Mom, I'm not the same because I saw how short time really is. Every breath matters now, every word, every look. We don't get to play pretend anymore." The boy I raised has become a burning lamp in this dark world. And yet, he still kisses me goodnight. He still holds my hand when we pray. He still gets nervous before speaking in public. He's still my son, but now I understand something I couldn't before. He was always God's first. I believe he was sent back on assignment, and I know the enemy is not happy about that. But I also know heaven stands with him. Because whatever Elijah saw beyond that frozen lake, it awakened something this world desperately needs. And it's only the beginning. If you've listened this far, I want to speak to you, not as someone who had a supernatural encounter, but as a mother. A mother who watched her child die, a mother who held his cold hand while machines beeped and nurses whispered behind curtains, a mother who begged God for just one more moment, and then got more than she could have ever imagined. Because Elijah didn't just come back to me, he came back with a message for you, a message for every parent, every teacher, every preacher, every soul who thinks they still have time. I used to think taking my son to Sunday school was enough. I used to believe that if he said a bedtime prayer, if we kept a Bible on the shelf, if we went to church on Easter and Christmas, that he'd be fine. But Elijah looked me in the eyes 3 nights ago and said, "Mom, most parents are teaching their kids to be good, not to be holy." He told me, "Good doesn't get into heaven. Surrender does that cut deep." Because I realized I had given Elijah everything a mother could give: meals, clothes, a roof, love. But I hadn't taught him how to stand in the fire. I hadn't taught him how to fight in the spirit. I hadn't trained him to hear God's voice in a noisy world. And most of us haven't. Jesus told Elijah, "Children are the last line before the fall, because the grown-ups have grown numb." So now Elijah speaks. He prays, he weeps for the world. He warns with urgency that breaks his little body. And I believe him. He's not performing. He's not dramatic. He's not seeking fame. He's been touched by something eternal, and he's carrying a fire that we as parents must protect, not tame. So if you're a mother like me, or a father, or a grandparent, or simply someone who loves someone, please hear me. Don't wait. Don't assume your child is too young to know the Holy Spirit. Don't assume you can get serious later. Don't assume they're fine, because Elijah saw what happens when souls assume their whole lives, and he saw where they end up. Start today. Pray over them. Speak life into them. Train them to listen to God, not just to behave. Show them what real surrender looks like. Let them see you kneel. Let them hear you repent. Let them witness your tears before God. Because the clock is ticking, the door is narrowing, and heaven isn't just a place we hope to reach. It's a battlefield we must prepare for. This is my testimony. This is Elijah's warning, and this is your invitation. Don't let it pass. May God awaken every parent through this. May He stir every heart that hears this story, and may He find us watching, praying, and ready. Grace Weaver, mother of Elijah, the boy who died, saw Jesus, and came back with fire in his eyes.